Hey guys, it's Seth here with another Raid Shadow Legends video. Now, I'm a little bit late to the party with Skorid the Halfspawn here. Obviously, I don't have access to the test server, so what I want to do today is kind of cover off some things I've been seeing from lots of different content creators and really help people make the judgment call about this fusion and whether or not it is really worth going for. Now, obviously, if you haven't gone for it, you've missed one event already, because I know the Dungeon Divers, or is it the Dragon tournament, ended yesterday, so you've missed one of the raids if you don't go for it. But one of the things I wanted to highlight is how technically this guy can be misleading in terms of his performance value in certain places like Hydra, places where Hex really is valuable. He's been designed to be almost exclusively, not quite, almost exclusively a Hydra damage dealer. That is what player see him as. That is what his kit has been designed around. There is one other area you can use him quite well, but we're going to be assessing him in Hydra and just qualifying that other area. Now, I've seen a lot of content creators do a lot of test server videos on this guy. Some of them have correctly called out some of the way that his damage was working. Others have kind of made this like assessment that he's a really good damage dealer. And I'm kind of here to say that actually I think he's one of the worst damage dealers you can bring for Hydra at the moment in terms of the top tier Hydra damage dealers, right? When you compare it with Michinaki, Ninja, we've got like Toshiro's, we've got things even as basic as like Fushans and basic as like Phenaxes and strong single target damage dealers like Whisper. He pales in comparison to those, and that is what I kind of want to cover today. Why does his damage look really good? Actually, it's actually not that good. So let's just talk first about how his kit works. So you have a single target A1. Single target is much better in Hydra than AoE, unless you can do lots and lots of strong AoE damage. So that's something to keep in mind, because the Hydra head has a passive on every single head that reduces AoE damage. That is why things like Soul Reap are not very good in Hydra. That is why lots of the AoE max HP champions have to work super hard to be able to hit the max HP cap, where someone like Newt doesn't have to because he doesn't get any penalties. So if you have a single target, he will apply a debuff spread, taking a Hex, and if there is no Hex, he will spread one to a random debuff. And for me, this is the first problem with this kit. You're almost going to always have a Hex with this guy. All he is ever doing is spreading Hex, and that is actually a problem for his A3 more than anything else, which we'll cover in a second. But essentially, it becomes a very, very lean option in the sense where it probably just ends up becoming an attacks one enemy. That's it. Then we get a second two, and Anathema Burst is probably the weirdest coded ability in the game, and it is currently bugged. So that is a big problem right now, and it should be highlighted to Playroom that they have not done enough to quickly remedy this situation. They're almost like going, well, let's not talk about the fact that the A2 is significantly bugged and not doing what it's meant to be doing, and then just release it anyway, because we can't really assess the value of it. People in the test server are testing this A2 ability, and it doesn't really reflect what it should be doing. So what should it be doing? It'll attack one enemy. Before attacking, he will place increased attack. Great, we always want it to be before he attacks. He repeats the attack on all enemies under a Hex debuff. This is similar to the way that Fushan's A1 works and other things like that, where they repeat the same damage. So he's meant to basically attack the same multiplier to all enemies under Hex. He also ignores shield buffs, which, to be honest, I kind of want to be depleting the life barrier. Unless you can kill them, you actually want to deplete the life barrier because you want to get that stun 9 times out of 10. It's not a very big thing for Hydra, but it could be big in other places. Now, here's what is actually happening. The way that it is coded is it will attack one enemy, then it will attack all enemies under Hex randomly. So it doesn't do an AoE, it does a random attack, except for the initial target, and then it won't repeat the random attack on anyone that is already attacked. So it is kind of this weird thing where it's like attack one enemy, then random attack all enemies under Hex except for the initial target, and don't repeat the random attack on the same target that I've already randomly attacked. I don't really know why it's been coded like that when we have champions in the game that have this like double hit effect, or will hit twice, or will repeat the attack. Those things are kind of coded to just repeat the attack. Just do it. Almost like AoE target with a Hex. That's all they need to do. Right now, it is not doing a clear reflection of its damage, which is a bit difficult for us to then assess, is this champion very good? If it does become a full proper AoE, then it should be a 3.8 on the single enemy, and then kind of a 3.8 AoE. That's how it should work. Now, whether or not the AoE is going to be an actual true AoE, like most things like Royal Guard's A2, or if it's going to be more like Marshal Ed's A1 where it's single target conditional, we don't really know because we haven't got the coded fix, we haven't seen the fix in game, so it's impossible for me to be able to know how good this is actually going to be. Then we have the A3. This is an AoE ability. Before attacking, he will place Hex debuff on all enemies, which means it's not subject to affinity, so you don't have to worry about any sort of weak hitting here. As long as you have enough accuracy and you don't 3%, it will always place the Hex. The damage inflicted by this skill will increase by 20% for each Hex debuff, stacks up to 100%. So in Hydra there, you can expect it to be an 80% bonus if you place Hex on all enemies. Now, here's the problem with this ability. You have to place the Hex. It is not 20% for each Hex out there or 20% damage on each head when they have a Hex. It is, I increase my damage when I place a debuff, but we're spreading the debuff on the A1. The only way you can place a debuff is if it's a longer duration that you're placing. So if we're trying to place it on a 1 turn, then it will replace it, or if it doesn't have it at all. So the likelihood is, because I'm debuff spreading Hex all the time, I'm probably going to be sustaining 2-turn Hexes quite a lot, because I'm likely to get round to this ability on a decapitated head with decreased speed, whilst I have increased speed far more often, which means that actually you're decreasing the strength of this ability every single time you debuff spread. His A1 works against his A3, and without this damage bonus, this is quite a weak hit. It needs the damage bonus for it to scale to a level that it becomes then an interesting damage champion for Hydra. He will also heal if you don't place the Hex. So it's kind of like, again, I don't get any healing unless I don't place Hex. So it's a bit of a weird ability for me. We then have a passive. He will gain 10% turn meter when he attacks with Hex. Cool. And he ignores 15% defense. So, you know, if you can stack up his ignore defense, you can get him to true damage potentially. So here, those are the problems I have with the kit. The A2 is bugged, so we can't get a clear reflection of what it's meant to do and how it's meant to work. You know, is it actually meant to ignore the first target or not? We don't really know, because what it says it does, it doesn't do. The A1 kind of just does nothing if you have nothing to spread, really. Like if you're spreading Hex and if you've already got 2-turn Hex out on everyone, it's not really doing anything other than attacking one enemy. And then this ability here is effectively dependent on you placing Hex. And if you don't, then it's just a standard AoE that any other champion has, right? It's nothing special. So those are the things I think are a problem for Hydra. Now, what I will say is one of his best places actually isn't Hydra. It is one-shotting waves if you are progressing through the game. Because this ability can stack up to 5 enemies, it does make it a significantly strong hit. You could use this to wave clear, which might be quite good if you're trying to progress through different dungeon stages, or maybe quite good in something like Sintranos. That could be areas to kind of look at. But what he won't be very good at, in my opinion, is being a solid Hydra damage dealer. And you might be sitting here going, well, I've seen content creator videos with like 200 million damage. Well, let's just have a quick summary of these. So I've just gone through a couple of content creator videos, looked out and see what kind of teams they're running. Obviously, I don't have access to a test server, so I can't really showcase this at the moment. I haven't finished the fusion at the moment, but I can kind of give you a bit of an assessment of why I'm saying his damage is misleading. So we've got Nubraids here. He's actually done a pretty good balanced team assessment for you. You can see he's done hard. He's put someone like a Razelvarg, a Skorid, an Airstrid, and you can quite clearly see that he is not that much above an Inquisitor Shamael. And you might be saying, well, he's still doing 13 million more. Yes, but Hex is a weird debuff, because the damage that a Hex debuff deals is not being attributed to the actual damage dealer. Rather, it is attributed to the person who places Hex. So a lot of Skorid's damage numbers will be from other people in the team adding to his Hex total. And that is an important thing to remember, because in this video, Nubraids also has cursed on Krisk and Airstrid. So you can see a big chunk of their damage is being attributed from the Hex. Krisk does not do 21 million damage normally. He's getting a good 10 million from Hex. So the more Hexes you have in the team, the less Skorid's damage is going to do. And it's going to make his team worse. So you're almost like in this situation where you're exclusively having to run Skorid and no other Hex champion. Otherwise, you lose so much damage on his A3. But doing so, until he then gets back around to his A3, reduces your overall team damage, which then ends up reducing his damage. So you end up in this like kind of weird balance situation where it's like, well, I can make Skorid do more damage, but my team will perform worse. or I can make my team perform better, and Skorid is going to perform worse. We've got Scratch here. Now, this is a pretty end game team, and this is some of my concerns when you look at Skorid and take without having the context. Now, Scratch did 2 videos. He's done pretty good balanced approach on the second one. This one was like, okay, how hard can I make him work? Because I'll be honest, any good damage dealer will be able to hit these kind of numbers when you put it with a 6-star Lazarius, a 5-star Ninja, and a 5-star Cardiel. Because what you're actually probably facing in Brutal is you're killing the heads near enough all the time. If your decapitation rate is significantly higher than average, then you can artificially inflate the damage of your team because essentially you're getting 200% more consistently. And that is about critical mass. Can I make my team do so much damage that I can kill heads really quickly? And when you can get to that state, which is probably what's happening here, yes, the numbers are going to look really big. But again, he's probably running, I would imagine, a cursed Lydia and maybe even a cursed Krisk in this damage team here, right? I imagine that's what he's doing. But even then, his damage numbers are not really breaching a crazy amount. Yes, he doesn't have a soul here, but he's probably getting a lot of damage from the Hex. We got an example here from Boozer. Boozer here has done one with, again, Airstrid, Skorid. And in this video, he's like, okay, you know, Skorid is beating a Razzlevarg. Well, yes, because of Hex. A Razzlevarg can produce significant amounts of Hex damage because Hex is a 10% spread when you're single targeting, and Razzlevarg's single target damage on his A1 is very, very high. So Skorid is getting basically free damage from both Shamael and Razzlevarg. And the quick assessment to do here is Inquisitor Shamael is exclusively single target, so you can take 10% of Shamael's damage and add that into Skorid, and then multiply it by 3, because essentially it's 10% to 3 enemy heads. So essentially, Shamael should be doing around about 30% of his damage into Skorid's damage. That's going to be somewhere in the region of 8 million damage, right? 10% of Skorid damage is probably just coming from Shamael alone. So that is what I'm trying to say about his damage. It looks like he's doing a lot, but actually he's not producing that damage. Finally, we got one here from Odd One, who was basically saying, like, you know, Skorid is better than Michinaki. In this example, again, I would say, one, there's a blessing differential in the sense that you've given 38% crit damage and 750 attack to Skorid, but you haven't given 650 defense or whatever it is, and 38% crit damage to Michinaki. So, you know, that damage difference is probably the imbalance of the blessing to begin with. The second thing I would add here is, again, it is probably likely that Skorid is applying the Hex. Michinaki's probably getting some of it, but not all of it. So again, there's going to be a damage difference here in that value. Do I think that Skorid can match Michinaki? Well, it depends on whether or not you have good cursed. And that to me is really the question. If you are applying a cursed set, right? I've got a Krisk here. He's got cursed set. 50% chance to apply a Hex, which means if I'm just bringing my own Hex champions, will Skorid's damage still be worthwhile over someone who does straightforward damage? And this is where I'm suggesting potentially not, right? I can go into Hydra over here. I can go into a Brutal tier, and I can just build some champions to do some damage here. Let me just build a quick team. So I've just built a basic damage team here, right? I've got Necmo and Duchess and Krisk and Lydia. Lydia and Krisk are going to be cursed. We've got Duchess in here just for a fair solution. That could easily be Shamael as an example. And we're using Whisper, and we're also using the Michinaki. Actually, let's just use Shamael. A bit easier to use, a little bit less problematic. I'll just use I think this one is my best damage, Shamael. Let's have a little quick check to make sure he's built. There we go. We could just use this. 5.4k, 306%. So we've got 2 epics in the team. And I will guarantee you that Krisk's damage will be on par, if not similar, with some of the other champions here. And what I'm trying to suggest is, are there just better damage dealers in the game that don't require so much conditional sort of work? Because essentially a lot of his damage, a lot of Skorid's damage is going to be arriving from the need to have Hex being placed on the A3. So if he's not placing that Hex debuff, then you're going to lose 80% of your damage potential, which is quite a lot of damage. So we can just see, we'll play it through here a little bit. Obviously, this team is very scuffed. I've only just thrown it in here just to see how it's going to work. So we're in this situation here now. I've managed to decapitate some heads in my scuffed Hydra team. We're on brutal difficulty. And you can see, like, my Whisper is going to be able to pump like 1.2 million damage. Obviously, it's a very high build, which I understand. But even the Shamael is going to be able to pump a reasonable amount of damage. And what I think my assessment of Skorid is currently at is he actually just a strong damage hexer, or is he simply someone you could replace? Like, is he going to add any more unique value than just maybe putting someone else in a curse set and then bringing a strong damage dealer? Because Whisper and Shamael are probably going to output more damage with a Michinaki than I think Skorid could ever dream of if you remove the effect of the Hex damage bonus. And I think that is what is misleading. That is certainly what I've said. And I have a number one rule. I have a global rule. Like, we can leave this one on auto here just to see how it performs. I have a global rule with fusions. I will never skip a fusion if it has a unique mechanic that you cannot find in any other champion. I did the Incarnate fusion because it has a unique mechanic with Arbiter. I did the Packmaster fusion because it has a unique mechanic with the dogs. They've kind of hinted that a dog will come in the future, but it does have a very cool interaction with the block buffs and the taunt, so it becomes a very interesting champion. And I think what I'm looking at with Skorid is he doesn't bring enough utility or uniqueness to really qualify that requirement, right? There's nothing that is really part of his ability set that is completely unique. He is basically a difficult to implement Hex damage dealer, and that is about it. There's no any bonuses. There's nothing. He doesn't help the team. He doesn't really give anything else. He just places Hex and he does damage. That is it. He reminds me a little bit of Jetney from back in the day, where it was kind of like a more damage-orientated War Maiden. That is a bit how I feel with this. So you can see I'm just pumping some damage through here. The team is able to just do lots of damage. And if I just stop this at like turn 12 here, we'll just let Whisper do her thing. Doing lots of damage. We'll stop it at this point here. We can have a little quick assessment of the damage. And you can see, you know, Shamael is doing 2.6 million. Nekmo is doing 5.7. Krisk is doing very little. Why? Because Nekmo Thar is in Hex. My Nekmo Thar is matching the damage output of Michinaki. He's not built for damage. The reason why is because of the Hex component. I think that is what I wanted to really get across in this video. This fusion is a bit trash. I think it's the worst fusion we've had of 2024, and we've had some pretty rough ones. It is probably worse than the Packmaster. It is worse than, I think, Incarnate, and I think a lot of people would be correct in saying that the Incarnate fusion wasn't very good. It wasn't a very good fusion. We didn't need another Provoke A1 when we just had Wixwell. The only reason why it's better than Skorid is because it does something that no other champion can do, which is protect an Arbiter in this very unique way. And it has like this kind of cooldown ability for an Arbiter. So there might be content in the future. It's very, very low might. It's very risky might. It's kind of like one of those things that might happen if all things align, that this actually becomes an essential part of a team, which is why I didn't skip it. But I have skipped fusions in the past, or nearly skipped fusions in the past, when it was something like Jetney. Jetney the Giant is effectively the same parameter. All it is a damage dealer with decreased defense. There are plenty of damage dealers in their game with decreased defense. There are plenty of Hex champions in their game. There are plenty of strong single target damage dealers in the game. So your question, should you go for Skorid Halfspawn, really comes down to, do you need a very strong magic wave clearer? Because I think that's what his S tier ability is. He's very good at being able to clear waves because of this 100% stack bonus. Now, just to give you a quick idea of why I'm saying about this damage effect and why it's a bit of a problem, we can take a look at this Infernal Malediction and Anathema Burst here as damage. Now in Clan Boss, it's impossible for us to repeat an attack at the moment because we can't attack another enemy. So you can see the difference in damage on this 82 at the moment is quite significant. We go from a sort of number 80, number 90 damage potential down to a 738. He becomes significantly weaker in a single target outcome, which means if you're ever fighting a single target boss, the A2 becomes really weak. That is assuming, of course, the current way that it works remains. And when we get to the Infernal Malediction, now this is obviously calculating with all of the different parameters in place. So it is calculating for Hex placement, and it is calculating as well the AoE penalty from Hydra. And you can see his damage profile here is 651 for Hydra. He is not getting anywhere near the level of numbers that I think people are expecting his A3 to get. However, in late endgame content, in sort of early mid-game content, you can see his damage is actually quite good. And again, in Clan Boss, he's dropping in place. Arena could be quite good as well, but obviously you've got to land those hexes, which is somewhat difficult to do. So what I would say is, if you need a wave clear champion, then obviously he's a great option for wave clearing. If you want to get a new Hexer in Hydra, I think there are better options. And I would definitely say, for example, let's compare him to an older champion. He is almost a poor man's Ruel, because Ruel has this same concept here where he's got increased accuracy. He hits double hits under Hex. It's very similar. But what has he got? Increased accuracy for the entire team. and a perfect veil for himself. So he gives himself an ability to deal with the Torment Head on his own, which is great. Also, massive turn meter fill here. He also increases the damage your team deals by 10%. Any hexed enemy will take 10% more damage. They also get reduced speed by 5%, which is valuable in a high speed environment. And also reduced resistance. So when a Ruel is hexing, he's giving your team a lot of bonus. We don't have to worry about placing a hex or anything for extra damage. He will just ignore 25%, not 15%, if everyone is under hex. He places an extra hit on enemies under hex. So he just does more damage because it's more consistent. And he also brings a decreased defense. So we're getting far more utility. And he's got a much stronger base attack, 1696. All the way down compared to a Skorid, which has a 1498, so almost like 200 more base attack near enough. He's not better than Ruel. Now, you might not have Ruel, which is what I'm trying to make the assessment. It depends on what you've got, but I think summary judgment, Skorid the Halfspawn, I think, is the worst fusion of 2024 because he offers no unique mechanics. His damage is kind of inflated by the fact I could simply just put Hex on my entire team. You have to punish your team to maximize his value, which makes it incredibly hard for you to get a balanced team environment because effectively the more hexes you run in your team, the weaker his damage becomes, which is a bit frustrating. And then if he's not the hex champion in your team, then all he is glorified damage. And I think there are better, more unique, more capable damage dealers out there than Skorid Halfspawn. But there you go, guys. That is the end of my assessment of Skorid. Let me know in the comments below what you think about Skorid. Have I got this completely wrong? I have been waiting to see lots of different content creator videos, waiting for the numbers in the game, waited for the multipliers. If they bug fix this A2, maybe my opinion will change. But like I said, it's really poor that they haven't bug fixed it already, because how can I make a judgment of a champion when his skills don't do what they say they do, right? This isn't doing what it says it does. It's not repeating the attack all enemies. It's randomly attacking all other enemies once. That is completely different, so they really need to fix that. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.